Greetings, loyal listeners and new recruits. I'm Drew Deach.
I'm Travis Newton.
And this is GenreVision. Every week, Travis and I review and recommend horror films, action movies, fantasy flicks, sci-fi cinema, and more. And we're closing out the Police Story series with Police Story 3 Supercop. We've done the first two films throughout this year, and we're going to end on the third entry. And I think we'll talk a little bit about the trilogy that we decided to watch as a whole when we get to the end. But first, some calls to action this week. We actually put up a post on GenreVision.com saying that this episode was going to be delayed.
It might be.
It might be. We don't know when you're listening to this. We're recording it actually kind of early, but it may end up being delayed. We don't know. Currently, there is a hurricane bearing down on Travis's part of the world, and we value his safety more than we do doing the show. So he's going to be flying out of Florida, and it may end up affecting this episode. It may end up affecting next week's episode on It Chapter 2. We don't know. Hurricanes are unfortunately maddeningly unpredictable.
I would say it will likely delay the release of next week's episode on It Chapter 2. So sorry we're not going to get that to you. Most likely is not going to get that to you on time, but like we said, our safety is more valuable than our ability to go see a movie and talk about it.
Yep. So everybody just wish Travis the best. We just want him to stay safe and keep his home in your thoughts, because he will not be there. So I really hope that you incur little to no damage.
Here's hoping.
In happier news, we have a new Finflix episode out. We reviewed 47 Meters Down Uncaged. It's one of our, mini review episodes. It's not a fully produced Finflix episode, but I think it turned out pretty good.
Yeah, it's a fun discussion, of a relatively small movie. And, we did the same thing with Crawl. That was our plan, was to just cover the new release Finflix for the summer in between seasons. And then sometime in the next couple months, you guys will hear what it is we're going to do for season 2 of Finflix.
Yep. Keep your eyes on GenreVision.com to find out more about that. And the last thing has become a refrain during call to action. We would really, really love for you guys to go rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts. It turns out, I guess, now that there's more subcategories in podcasting, we actually started to chart for certain subcategories.
Yeah, not very high, mind you, because this is a really, really popular subcategory of podcast to make. Like, it's a really crowded subcategory, I guess you should say. But the more reviews we get, the greater charting potential we have. So it's very important that we get reviews and those ratings on the Apple Podcast Store. You can do that on your Mac or your PC or on your iOS device, whether it be an iPhone, iPod Touch, iPad, so on and so forth. Your participation in this is really, really appreciated. It's very important for podcasts on the Apple Podcast Store.
Yeah, it's the best way to support us right now. So if you like what we do, please rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts. Okay, Police Story 3, Supercop.
Also known as Supercop when it was released in the United States 4 years after.
Yes, when it was released by Miramax. We all know who was behind that. It was obviously, I think, only available in English dub during its release here in the States.
Yep.
And Supercop, most people, that was probably an introductory Jackie Chan film for them here in the West, not knowing that it was part of an ongoing series of films. And we've covered the first two Police Story films. And the first two Police Story films were recently released by Criterion as a package deal. And I had always kind of known about Supercop, because, growing up in that era when Jackie Chan was really taking off, and I had always heard great things about it. I think, Quentin Tarantino has said, like, if there was one piece of film that could be shown to, like, alien races or something, it would be the climax of Police Story 3. So this has always been very hyped up for me. And after seeing it, I think this is still a really good movie. But when we get towards the end of the episode and we talk about the Police Story trilogy that we watched, this is a very different movie than Police Story and Police Story 2.
It is, yeah. You'll notice some differences immediately. One of the big things you'll notice is that Jackie Chan does not have a director's credit on this film, unlike on the first two. The director of this one is actually Stanley Tong, who also, I believe, did the fight choreography for the film.
Yes, and from the get-go, there's a lot of different things going on here. One of the most noticeable is this is the first in the Police Story series to be shot with sync sound.
Right. Now, if you don't know what sync sound is the process of recording dialogue on set while the characters are actually performing in front of the cameras and making sure it's synced during playback and editing. You know, the intention there is to use the sound that you capture on set in the final film. Overseas, in foreign markets, this was not the popular way to make movies, literally until like the 80s and 90s. This is why when you watch a whole bunch of spaghetti westerns, they're all dubbed in English later. And pretty much every actor that showed up on set was speaking their own language. So you'll watch spaghetti westerns and certain characters, you know, were performed by people from Spain, or certain characters were performed by people from Italy, or where have you. They're all just speaking their own languages on set and they dub it over afterwards. And this allows a lot of freedom in that you're not concerned on set about having to capture good sound. You don't need your set to be quiet. And you can actually do quite a bit of rewriting after you shoot your footage. If there's something like if you need to change a character's name, or if you need to change the name of a place, or any number of things, you can adjust performance and rewrite the movie essentially after production.
So Police Story 3 was the first film to do that. And it seems like it would be a small detail, but the movie kicks off with a bunch of people in a boardroom talking, and immediately it's like, oh yeah, this already has a different feel than the previous movies, not just because of the sync sound, but that is a factor. But this setup basically reintroduces us to Kakoi, who is going to be selected for a super secret mission to take down some big bad crime boss. It's interesting. Looking back, I think that the previous Police Story movies, while they were by no means revolutionary in their action plotting, comparatively, Police Story 3 is pretty textbook 101 in terms of the kind of super buddy cop action story that it's going to tell. Its uniqueness is in its setting, but other than that, this is really by the books from a plotting standpoint.
Right. It's sort of a, I can't really call it globe-trotting, but it goes to more locations than the other Police Story, the prior two Police Story films did. The other two Police Story films were Hong Kong movies that took place in Hong Kong. This one actually takes them to mainland China for a big chunk of the action, and then to Thailand for a bit, and then to Malaysia for the third act of the film. So yeah, it's not exactly globe-trotting, but they do explore different locales, and that's pretty different. So there is a little bit of that James Bond element, secret identities and things like that. It's not anywhere near as, I hesitate to call most James Bond films straight-faced, but, you know, Kakui, played by Jackie Chan, is still just as much of a goofball here as he ever was. Well,
it's interesting. I think Police Story 3 has less of what I'd call clown energy.
Sure.
And you know, that's going to be like, oh, you guys are doing It Chapter 2 next week. Doesn't that have a lot of clown energy? It's like, well,
big clown energy.
Yeah, big clown energy. Police Story 1 and 2 feel kind of like comedies that become action movies, and Police Story 3 is more an action movie with comedy in it.
Sure.
And because it has to kind of be a little bit more approachable in terms of its structure and how it presents itself, it's more digestibly silly. Like, there is still plenty of comedy in the movie and really funny stuff that I'm sure we'll mention, but it's not quite at, like, for example, in the first Police Story, there's an entire sequence of Jackie Chan trying to, you know, talk on all these different telephones while also kicking a pencil up and eating his dinner. There's no kind of that kind of Buster Keaton comedy for the most part in Police Story 3.
Right. There's a little bit of slapstick in Police Story 3 during the action scenes, but when the action isn't going on, like there are some really silly gags involving disguises and certain other, you know, characters that we know from previous movies suddenly playing new roles in disguise and things like that. So it's got a little bit of that Pink Panther influence that the other Police Story films had, but in nowhere near the quantity I think that we're used to, or you know, doesn't quite have that manic energy that the prior two have. Like, there's a sequence in Police Story 2 where Kakui's girlfriend May, played by Maggie Chung, yells at him in the police station, ends up chasing him into the men's locker room where she like passes a whole bunch of naked dudes and ends up eventually like going into the same toilet stall as another character who's taking a shit. Like, it doesn't get anywhere near that wacky, or, you know, it doesn't have that edge to it in this movie. But yeah, the humor when it is there is still fairly funny.
So the basic setup is that Kukui is going to be partnered with an officer from kind of the mainland China police force.
She's from Interpol, I believe.
Right.
And it happens to work in mainland China. So this is Inspector Yang, and she's played by Michelle Yeoh, who you will know from all the awesome shit she's been in. We did a movie of hers, a Hong Kong movie of hers called Yes, Madam.
Yes.
Earlier this year.
It's awesome. So this gives us a more kind of typical buddy cop structure of, you know, you're from one side of the tracks, I'm from the other. Chan is the very kind of loose cannon, but not in the American way, in his goofy, everyman, dopey way. And, you know, Yo is the very straight-laced, straight-faced operator. And my favorite part involving that setup is when Yang takes Kukui to basically the police academy where they're all training.
Yeah, and it's highly militarized.
Yes, and he gets into a little fun sparring match with kind of the head captain or whatever. And there are these weird kind of like wheel things that people are rolling around on. And eventually he ends up, you know, ducking out of the fight and just being like, oh, what's this thing here? How do you use it? And he ends up getting in this wheel and rolling out. And that has a little bit of that original Police Story goofiness to it. Like that stuff peeks through from time to time.
Sure. But I think the majority of the comedy is derived from that dynamic between Michelle Yeoh's character and Jackie Chan's character. And it's playful, and it's definitely talking about the interplay of politics between Hong Kong and China at the time. You know, this being released in the early 90s, Hong Kong at the time was still under British sovereignty. You know, the film opens on a portrait of the Queen, so it really makes no attempts to hide the fact that Hong Kong is fundamentally different. But it also knows that British sovereignty is supposed to end in just a couple years, in 1997. Heck, I mean, this wasn't even released in the U.S. until 1996. So it's aware that, you know, that there is a dynamic to play with between a citizen of Hong Kong like Kukui and a mainland Chinese cop, you know, Michelle Yeoh's character.
Well, while we do return to Hong Kong in the climax, the majority of the movie is outwardly exploring parts of mainland China. And I think it's very clear that the movie wants to present mainland China as, you know, it's rural, but it's a good place filled with good people. You know, this is part of, you know, all these kind of movies are always going to be in some way propaganda. And Police Story 3 is no different, but for this series, it actually leads to some really interesting locations and fun setup. I mean, the best setup being that Kukui is basically going to go undercover and infiltrate this criminal gang and get in with them. And eventually they're going to pass through his supposed hometown, the identity that he's taken on. And of course he's nervous and trying to duck everything because he's like, they're going to find out that this is all BS. But then when he gets there, everybody in the town knows him and is calling him by his, you know, fake name. And Michelle Yeoh shows up and is playing his little sister. And this interplay that they have as these, you know, fake, you know, brother and sister is really funny.
Oh, it's hilarious. But the big laugh in this scene for me was the reveal of Uncle Bill playing Jackie Chan's fake persona's fake mom.
Oh, yes.
Oh my God. I laughed so hard. This is so funny.
It took me a second to realize it's Uncle Bill, who's Kukui's basically kind of his immediate superior in the other movies. His chief,
right, and not the one who chews his ass, which is always, you know, in the first two films was the same guy. It's a different guy this time.
Yes, and Uncle Bill comes out and he's playing, you know, a very blind old Chinese woman, and he's just great.
He's chewing that scenery. He's really owning the scene. But I love how this is choreographed and staged, where just as soon as it seems Jackie Chan's character's cover is about to be blown, something will happen that just sort of keeps the train on the track. So, the way that they play with that tension and release in the scene is really, really masterful. Just before Michelle Yeoh walks in, this guy, who's trying to prove that Kakui's secret identity is actually real, walks over to like a wall of family photos, which have all been staged earlier in the film. That's how you're watching a police story movie, is there's actually a montage of taking staged photos.
Yeah.
But he's like, who's this woman standing here in this picture with you? And of course, Kakui's like, I don't actually know. He's forgotten what Michelle Yeoh's fake relationship is to him. So as soon as she walks in and says, it's your sister, I'm here.
Oh, and I just like, because then he's to me like, oh yes, little sister, look, and you've put on some weight, and he like smushes her face.
Oh yeah, pinches her cheeks real hard and stuff like that. And of course,
funny.
She gets her hits in on him later. She gives him a well-deserved smack. So yeah, all that stuff's really, really great. Love that stuff. I do feel the movie hits kind of a slow point before this. Kakui's first job for this Interpol gig is to go break this guy out of a labor camp in mainland China. Like, that's the whole reason he was given the undercover identity to begin with. This guy, depends on which subtitle track you watch it with. Sometimes his character is called Panther, and sometimes he's called Pao, P-A-O. He's credited on IMDb as Panther. But they go break Panther out of this camp, which is sort of an uneventful action sequence. It's got a little bit of fun stuff in it, but it's not really a big deal. And then Panther works for this drug smuggler from Hong Kong, a guy named Chaibot. And the whole goal of Kakui and Yang at this point is to get in with Panther, prove to Panther and his guys that they're worthy of working for Chaibot as well. That way they can go take Chaibot down. Yeah,
he's that opening sequence at the boardroom of the different forces assigning the mission. I love the one guy who's like, who directly says, "What we need is a Supercop." Mm-hmm. They said it's like Chaibot. Like, Chaibot's the guy we want to take down. So you're going to infiltrate his gang, and this is how you're going to help one of his guys bust out of this labor camp. You're going to take him back, and then you're going to get in good with Chaibot. Yeah, the labor camp stuff was not my favorite action in the movie. It's got some clever stuff, but yeah, I can admit that it was a little slow going in that regard. And I think plotting wise, like, so much this is then, okay, it's kind of, again, textbook. I'm undercover. I can't let my cover get blown, which means we're going to get into situations where the criminals are going to do bad criminal things and we can't stop them.
Right.
Because we're going to blow our cover.
They end up getting into a fight later on in a local town when a group of undercover police officers working for mainland China recognize Jackie Chan's character as the guy who broke Panther or Pao out of the labor camp. And they're like, it's them, it's the fugitives. And that's like, oh shit. So they got to go on the run. And Inspector Yang manages to make sure they escape. And then she lies to Panther, saying that she actually had to kill one of the cops in order for them to get away. So they're trying to prove that they're just, bad hard asses who can fall in with Chaibot's gang. And at this point, Panther believes them.
Yeah. And they're, there's, I think when we talk about the action, and this has been, I think, a natural evolution in the Police Story movies, but Police Story 3 kind of really takes it and runs with it, is there was a lot more vehicular action in 3.
Oh, yeah.
There's a giant boat chase with Panther at the helm, with this boat that has, like, I don't know, like, how many fucking outboard motors?
I think it had like 5 outboards on it. It was quite overkill.
It's crazy.
But yeah, huge shootout and boat chase, very James Bond.
Yeah, this is much more, I think, kind of expected big scale action, and I think that's a fallout from where action cinema was changing in the late 80s into the 90s, and Police Story kind of changed with it. There isn't an equivalent to something like the playground fight in Police Story 3.
No, and this is one of the big differences that we'll mention here between those first two Police Story movies and this one. Those first two, even though the second one doesn't have as much martial arts stuff in it, those first two are still martial arts films, I think. The third one isn't. There is some martial arts in it, but it's not really the focus of the action. The focus of the action in 3 is big vehicular set pieces, so helicopters, trains, cars, boats, shootouts, lots more gunplay. And while the martial arts choreography that is there is pretty good, it takes a backseat. It's not a martial arts film.
Well, and we talked about this before we were recording about the approach to this was very different in that this was the first of these movies to have storyboards.
Right. So Stanley Tong's style in shooting this movie is way more measured. So, of course, we talked earlier about having to record sync sound on this picture, which means that when a character says a line of dialogue in a room in front of a camera while he's being recorded, or while they're being recorded more accurately, they're intending to use that line as it is recorded and said on set in the edit later. Of course, you can always do dialogue replacement and replace it in post if you need to, but the idea in recording sync sound is that you don't necessarily have to do that, or it's helpful to have that sound from set in the edit. And doing so requires a lot more planning. You have to make sure that before you start shooting a movie, that you have a solid script and that, you have all of the actors knowing their dialogue. If you don't shoot with sync sound, some of this stuff you don't have to worry about on set. You watch some of John Woo's movies like Hard Boiled, not shot with sync sound, and also not shot with a solid script. That shoot just kind of like progressed from day to day. And The Killer as well. I think both of those movies were kind of, half written on the fly from what I've heard about them. But this is clearly a lot more measured. And that starts in pre-production of like knowing the movie that you're going to shoot, writing it very specifically, storyboarding it very specifically. And I think that approach comes across in the final edit. Like it's way more measured, less manic.
Right. And I don't think that's an inherently negative or positive thing.
It's just a thing.
It's just different than the first 2 movies that we watched. But story-wise, a couple things I wanted to note. When they finally do get to meet Chaibot, who is basically a straight-up Bond villain, to the point where he's even wearing a Nehru jacket.
Yep, gray Nehru jacket. When we first meet Chaibot, he's playing Streets of Rage.
Is that what I didn't see it on the television screen. But I was like, I know that's a Genesis or a Master System.
It's a Genesis.
And he's playing video games, and he's kind of he's a way more stereotypical bad guy than I think we saw in the first 2 movies, which again is not an inherently bad or good thing. It's just different, and it's stock. Like, I won't deny that, but it works. I immediately didn't like Chaibot and was like, yeah, okay.
He's more believably evil, I guess you can say, than like the villains from 1 and 2.
Right. Well, Chu Tao, from the first 2, he had his maniacal laugh just as Chaibot does, but I don't know, the approach is very, again, I think it's broader here to be able to appeal to an even larger global audience. Like, you could watch a lot of this movie with no dialogue and no sound or anything, and you could understand the relationships between characters.
Exactly. Yeah, it lays things out clearly enough, even with just visuals, for you to understand the basic beats. So once they are at Chaibot's, they amp up the stakes a little bit. Basically, they show that if you betray Chaibot, you'll get bludgeoned to death with a durian, or you'll get drowned in a swimming pool, or, he's okay with people overdosing on heroin because he's a shitty, awful person who smuggles heroin in from Thailand.
Well, he'll apparently use corpses to smuggle the drugs in.
Right.
Like, that when they get to Chaibot's place, there's a bunch of, there's some girls, and they're shooting up, and then we cut back, and the guy who was giving them the drugs comes in and is like, hey, she died from the shot. And he's like, whatever, we can use the corpse. I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, this guy is, it's one note evil, but it works. Like, again, it works for this kind of movie. And then the sequence that we get to after that is going to be kind of this meetup with local generals and other crime figures that Chaibot's doing business with.
So this is in the jungles of Thailand. He meets this general who grows opium, and there's this big cabal of assholes sitting around like a big conference table in this jungle hut. It's like the pimp tribunal in Black Dynamite.
Yeah. It's again, this is very kind of stereotypical, classic B action movie structure and plotting and stuff like that. Like the conference of bad guys is always a thing.
Sure. And then, of course, the meeting turns sour because, like, everybody at the table is an asshole except for Yang. And everybody takes out their gun. And the endless shots of people taking out their guns and pointing at each other had me in stitches. It's so funny.
Yeah, it definitely understands the comedic energy. This is also the sequence where, like you said, Chaibot murders somebody by smashing their head with a piece of durian fruit, which is great. That made me like him even more as a villain. But this sequence, I think, was very indicative to me of what Police Story 3 wanted to do on a bigger action scale, because
it looks like Predator. Looks just like Predator.
Right. It's very much like the raid on the prisoner camp in Predator, in that there's people bazookaing huts. You know, like there's
those hut explosions are incredible.
They're great. I mean, and there's many of them. Like you said, there's more of a focus on gunplay action, and this is something that, again, you can't really have that same improvisational spirit as you did in the first two movies, when it's just, you know, guys doing different physical stunt things. This is going to have to be way more controlled.
Right. So, like we said, it's really that blend of something like Predator or even Rambo 2, weirdly enough.
Yeah, but there's good gags in here. There's a whole bit of Yang, Yo's character. Chaibot has strapped on a bulletproof vest on her, but it's got like a bunch of dynamite or thermite or something, some explosive chemical. Supposedly. And so there's a great gag. I love this. Might be my favorite line in the movie. Is Kukui and Yang end up together, and she says, you know, it's like, I've got this thing, he's strapped dynamite on me, and she goes, I can't get shot, and Kukui goes, well, neither can I.
Right. Yeah.
That's a great little in the fray exchange.
Well, and there's that moment where she needs to duck down, but she's basically got to fall really quickly, and he's on the ground already, and she's like, hold me or catch me, something like that. So he's basically holding her up by the front of her chest in the air, and then of course she falls down on him, and there's always that little sexual dynamic hinted at between the characters. It never goes anywhere.
No, it's played purely for comedy.
Right, exactly. It's more about the buddy cop contrast, you know, the man and woman thing. So at this point, after this scene, here's where the plotting gets a little hazier. Suddenly, we're introduced to Chaibot's wife, who is imprisoned in Malaysia for something that could possibly carry a death sentence. And for reasons that aren't clear, Chaibot needs to break her out of prison because only she knows some secret codes to like a Swiss bank account.
It basically is where he's offshore hiding all of the money from his drug operation.
Right. So Chaibot brings his whole gang, including Kakui and Yang, who are still undercover, just barely. Their cover is in danger of being blown constantly in the movie, which really keeps that conflict present. They bring them to Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia to stage this jailbreak of Chaibot's wife.
Yes, and this big jailbreak is going to end up being our climax. But before that, they're at this resort area. And we haven't mentioned too much Maggie Cheung's character, who still is Kukui's girlfriend in 3, but was his girlfriend in the first 2 films. She's apparently working for like a tour group.
Yeah, she's giving tours in Malaysia, which is like, huh? I don't think they mentioned this in the first act.
Well, it's fine, because the only reason it's there is so that Kukui can run into her and she can almost blow his cover and create a comedy of errors type deal that feels the most to me like a written sequence from the first 2 films, and that, you know, May sees Kukui with Yang, and every time she sees them, it looks like they are engaged somehow romantically. They're not.
Well, the one part where where Kakui goes, quick, massage me. And he flips face down into like a poolside deck chair, which has those like plastic slats that go across the chair.
Oh, the close up of that.
And you see his face getting smushed through the slats in the back of the chair, and his nose is poking through the slats. It's so funny. And of course, it's Jackie Chan. Like, you can tell that guy's nose a mile away. He's just got a very characteristic face.
Well, and of course, May is trying to see if it is Kakui. So she, kneels down and looks, and she can't make out the face from the from the slats on the thing. So she starts singing this song that is just his name.
Yeah.
It's so funny.
She's trying to get any method she can to get him to admit he's actually Kakui.
Yeah, and that he's possibly, he's cheating on her. And eventually, when he does get caught and they have this confrontation, he's like, look, quiet. Like, I can't tell you what's going on right now. You just need to, be quiet. You're going to blow my cover. And so Panther and the other kind of gang members see this going on, and they're like, what's going on over there? So Kakui has to play it off that May is a hooker trying to solicit him for business. And he has to like push her into a pool to get rid of her. It's so funny.
Yeah, they actually play this up a little bit later, but unfortunately, the ruse does not last. And unfortunately, again, May is kidnapped, abducted, held hostage yet again. I hate it. I don't like it, but it explains.
As is her lot in life.
Yeah, it sucks. And she's not given nearly enough screen time.
No, I was really, screw the logic. I hate that word when talking about films, but screw it when it comes to why she's there at that exact moment to run into Kakui. I was really excited. I was like, oh, cool, May. Like,
yeah, I wanted to see May too. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I was like, okay. And this whole comedic misunderstanding and having to play off that, she's a hooker, which that she then realizes that's what's going on. So when he's about to get busted again, she like slaps him and is like, I
what's
would
your
go
business?
Yeah. Like, I was like, hey, yay, May. Like, this feels like classic police story.
Yeah. Well, May has, she's portrayed as being like a particularly feisty and capable character, except when she's being kidnapped or taken hostage, which just, it's
also multilingual.
Yes, absolutely. So it's frustrating to see that again. But like in Hong Kong under British rule, like you were probably taught English in school. So
fair enough. But she's, I think, the only Chinese person that we see being multilingual. Well, not true. Well, because there's a whole thing about speaking Cantonese and Mandarin.
Yes.
In this. And there's even there's a really funny moment during that hut, the whole Predator sequence, where a bunch of soldiers hold up Yang and Kakui and are talking to them in Mandarin while Yang and Kakui are talking in Cantonese. And they're like, did they say stop? I don't know. And on 3, I'm going to pretend to throw this grenade. And then he throws the grenade, but the window shutter comes down because Yang pulls it.
Oh, yeah.
So there's some fun stuff in that. But yes, May gets kidnapped when they realize that, okay, this is, these people are police officers, and we're going to hold his girlfriend hostage so that they help us break out Chaibot's wife. And that's going to be the big action sequence. Now, here's the thing. I was very, very hyped up for this finale action sequence because I've read multiple things about this finale action sequence being one of the greatest in action film history. Not letting, we're talking globally, like any action film. This sequence is the first time in a police story movie where I felt genuine anxiety.
Yeah, it's like a Mission Impossible Fallout sequence and like a Fury Road sequence mixed.
It's so much more terrifying because with Mission Impossible, I know like there's such a level of invincibility to Tom Cruise, and even though he does crazy things, there is some kind of understanding of he's going to be okay.
Right. Well, I mean, he's the series' most valuable asset. They're going to do everything they can to protect him, even if he's jumping out of the back of a plane. When Jackie Chan, however, is dangling from a rope ladder on the side of a helicopter, you really don't get the sense that there's as much of a safety net for somebody like him in that instance.
Jesus Christ. I'm not even being facetious. I was having palpitations during that sequence where they're just flying a helicopter and he is just hanging off of a rope ladder. And the shots, oh my God, like the shots where they're looking down from the cockpit of the helicopter, looking down at him. I got like vicarious vertigo.
Yeah, it's not like Batman hanging on the rope ladder with the shark on his leg. It ain't like that.
But it's also because they're really doing this. This is, but even before that, speaking of a helicopter, it's
kind of a Matrix Reloaded sequence here with the cars.
Yeah, Chibot is holding May hostage and threatening to kill her, and Jackie Chan's like, give her up, and then I'll come to you and give you your wife or whatever. And they throw May out of this helicopter, and she smacks down onto the hood of a car. Oh my gosh, that hit.
Yeah, that was really, really painful. And Maggie Cheung has done her share of stunts for this series. I don't know if that was her in that wide shot where she hits the hood of the car, but god damn, it sure looked like her. So after they throw May out of the helicopter, this whole releasing May as a hostage is dependent upon the actual trade of May and Chibot's wife. But while the police show up and start firing their guns, Chibot's wife manages to escape and get into a van with Panther and another one of the henchmen. And they're driving along in their big gray van. Inspector Yang hops up on top of the big gray van and is like along the side. There's this incredible gag where she's hanging from the side of the van and basically pulls her up and does a handstand on the side of the gray van to avoid an oncoming car. It's awesome.
Oh my gosh, yeah, I have that note here too where it's like a car or a bus or something, and she does it just in time, and it's another one of those like, how real was that? Like,
I don't know, but because it's done in a couple of cuts, like it's not done in a single shot, so you don't really know exactly how real it was, but it feels great.
It's fantastic, and Yo is doing just as much terrifying stuff as Chan. For example, they eventually the big sequence takes place on this train. And this train sequence, I know, is what everybody's talking about when they talk about how crazy the action in this is. Yo herself has to ride a motorcycle onto the top of a moving train.
Yeah.
It's gonzo.
Now, I mean, this is the kind of stuff that if you do it in an Uncharted video game, you get a little bit of an adrenaline kick on it because it's really cool. But to watch Michelle Yeoh do it is like scrotum shriveling incredible. I mean, it's just, oh my God, I can't believe she did it.
Well, because the shot, and they even, slow the frame rate down so you see it, where the front wheel hits the back of the train car just in time for the back wheel to come down and her get on it. And when they show the outtake reel in the after credits, which we'll talk about, they show how many times they did that. And it's just like, it is so scary.
And then the helicopter that Kakui is dangling from, the one with Chibon in it, lands on the moving train. For real. And then there's this fucking helicopter on this back of this moving train with its blades still spinning and shit. And they're doing fight choreography next to a helicopter with its blades still spinning for real on the back of this train. It's like, how was everybody not decapitated? Jesus God.
That shot, there's a shot where I don't know if it's Chibot. I think it's Chibot, but it might be one of his henchmen. Presses Michelle Yeoh up against the rear rotor. Like, oh, that stuff just made my stomach sink. It's amazing. But even in this moment, there is still classic Jackie Chan action comedy.
Oh, yeah. He falls from that rope ladder into a giant train car full of durian.
and he's so, ah! But even more so, I love he's fighting this one henchman guy, and Jackie is facing in the direction that the train is going, and the guy has his back to it, and Jackie can see that there's this big sign coming up.
Ooh.
So he starts distracting this guy by doing, a bunch of martial arts poses and then just waiting it out. And this guy's kind of staring down like, what is this guy doing? Just to wait out so this guy can get smacked by this giant sign. And that sign hit is killer.
Oh yeah, they show it in full shot, the guy getting whacked in the back of the head with a breakaway sign. It could not have felt good.
No, not at all. And the escalation of this final act, that's what I want to say, is that like, it's I shouldn't say it's easy, but you expect action sequences to have big moments and for you to remember those big moments. But it's really hard, especially with this action sequence, to continue to escalate the amount of crazy that you're seeing.
Yeah.
And it kind of climaxes in one of the most beautifully amazing, crazy moments I've ever seen in any action film. And that is how Chaibot dies.
Yeah, there's some there's some really good explosion work on this too.
Oh my gosh. Like that he is basically impaled, flamingly impaled into the exploding helicopter on the back that is landed on the back of this train.
It was when it strikes a bridge, right?
Yeah, it strikes like a bridge overhang, and Chaibot is like stuck on the helicopter, and there's a great dolly zoom in of him screaming, just it just hits this bridge, and there's has to be obviously it's a dummy or something, but you see Chaibot,
you see the impact, yeah,
you see the explosion and the flames on his body and everything. I'm like, oh my god,
this is like the gazillion-dollar version of that shot of Neil Breen getting hit by the car in Fateful Findings, like where it actually shows the impact in the wide shot. It's like, yes, this is what we need to actually feel that impact. Or it's a little bit like Rufus Sewell's death in the Zorro movie that he was the villain in.
Oh yeah.
Where he's strapped to the front of that train, and then the train eats mad shit.
Yeah, so that's a good comparison. Yeah, it's. I was applauding. I was alone in my apartment and just applauding that amazing death. Like it's phenomenal.
Then the movie ends very shortly thereafter. The only three I think left standing after this whole event are the wife, Chaibot's wife, and Kakui and Yang. And the wife gives Kakui and Yang the bank account info, the Swiss bank account info, so they can get all the money out of the bank account. And Kakui, being, lawful good, chaotic good.
Yeah.
He's like, that money belongs to the Hong Kong government. And Inspector Yang, in her communist ways, goes, no, that money belongs to the Chinese people. And then Kakui replies, well, it's not really going to matter if it goes to me because after 1997, we're going to be under Chinese sovereignty anyway. Movie ends.
Well, no, it doesn't exactly end. We then have to watch the traditional outtake reel.
Oh, of course, yeah. But that's where the plot stops is what I mean.
The plot stops, yes. But as I said before, this was the first time I felt anxious. This is the first time during a Police Story outtake reel where I was terrified. Like, I was genuinely terrified at the things I was seeing.
Oh, man, that shot of Michelle Yeoh falling off the top of that van and onto the hood of the red car and then falling off the hood of the red car. It's like, oh, my God, everybody runs into the shot and you can tell they're so concerned for her.
Yeah, I mean, that obviously she's okay and everything, but even stuff that wasn't meant, I think, to be terrifying. There's a shot where they show a camera operator who is up on this giant crane, like this construction level crane. And he's just like giving a thumbs up, and they pull back and they show just how high up he is. Oh, I had just like a gag reflex now thinking about it. Like, that really disturbs me. Like I have a very specific thing with heights and everything, and that is, because the other Police Story outtake reels, it was, yeah, this stunt went bad and somebody got hurt, and it's like, oh yeah, that's painful, but it wasn't terror that I felt.
No.
Whereas in this one, it's like, oh my gosh, they show those shots of Jackie Chan, strapped onto that helicopter rope ladder and stuff, and I'm like, I don't want to watch this. This is like really unnerving.
That's like deep visceral fear. Like the one that got me real bad in Police Story 2 was when I think it was Maggie Chung was running under all of those like steel. Oh yeah, those steel pieces, and they all tipped over like dominoes, and one hit her square on the top of the head, and she started bleeding like a motherfucker. That hurt. I just instantly grabbed my head. But yeah, this one is definitely like that gut wrenching fear, that instant flop sweat sort of stuff. And that's really representative of how the action evolved from Police Story 2 to Police Story 3. It is, taking those influences from Hollywood and some other places as well to not only up the ante, but to fundamentally change, I think, what the fabric of action cinema was for Hong Kong.
For sure. I mean, the Police Story, this is the last one we're doing, but there are many, many more Police Story entries, and they've all kind of changed and adapted to the action landscape of the time. And Police Story 3, we have to remember, after 1988, action cinema changed forever because of Die Hard.
Right.
Die Hard changed what audiences tonally and production-wise expected from action cinema. And that's the thing, like, Police Story 3 feels very much like a post-Die Hard movie, whereas Police Story 1 and 2 feel more like kind of classic, you know, that 80s Hong Kong martial arts focused flavor. Kind of, you know, before we talk about the three movies that we watched as a whole and the franchise and everything, final summations on Police Story 3, I liked this movie a lot, and I totally get the love that it has and its importance in action film cinema history, and for that final sequence alone is something that people need to see. But the more I've sat with it, I think I'm in your camp, Travis, where I find the energy of the first two movies a little bit more unique and appealing, even though I think Police Story 3 is a better movie than Police Story 2.
For me, I think Police Story 2 has higher highs. It's just more of what I enjoy. Like that playground fight in Police Story 2. Holy fuck, is that cool?
Well, I was gonna ask you, do you have a favorite gag or, you know, stunt or anything from the three movies that we saw? Because mine is from Police Story 2.
Really? Actually, no, mine would probably be the shopping mall stuff. All of the shopping mall stuff from the first Police Story.
Well, yeah, if you pick a whole sequence. But if I was picking one specific gag, the one that I continue to think about that is just so badass and cool and everything, it's Police Story 2 when Kukui is in the alleyway and he runs up the walls, that car's coming in, and then he jumps down and kicks through the windshield.
That's cool as fuck. No, I think the big gag in Police Story 1 is still one of my favorite gags.
The pole.
Yeah, the
pole
sliding down the pole. That's just, it's incredible. And the fact that like they shot it with a bazillion camera angles, they knew. And of course it looked so good that they used like every single camera angle. You know, they just repeat it over and over again in the movie as if to say, check this motherfucker out. And then with regards to where Police Story 3 falls for me in quality, I'll admit, like I watched, it took me 2 nights to watch the movie. I watched the first half of the movie earlier this week, and like I had to get a better quality version of it. Like I just had to find a better quality version of it because the movie looks pretty good. You know, they shot it with nice anamorphic lenses, and I wanted to make sure that I had a high def copy. So I secured one of those, and then I got a better track of subtitles. So once I did that, like I actually rewatched the film from the beginning and had a way better time with it. I probably would place it on par with Police Story 2, if only because the version of Police Story 2 that is currently available to us is that big, long international cut that has way more added stuff that takes away from the pacing of the film.
Right.
I think if Police Story 2, if we had access to that tighter cut, and if that was the first cut of the movie that I ever watched, I would probably rank Police Story 2 ahead of it. But Police Story 3 is by no means a disappointment or a bad film. It is excellent. There are things I found disappointing about it. For instance, there's really no scene in the beginning of the film that allows us to sort of catch up with Kakui and how he's been doing since the end of Police Story 2. Between 1 and 2, that's really not an issue because the second one picks up right after the first one. So there's really no reason to give us time, you know, or an explanation of what he's been doing with his time.
Well, there's a lot more callbacks and I think continuity between 1 and 2. And it's very clear that Police Story 3 was made to be something that international audiences could see and have an in with without ever seeing the first two.
Right.
So there is not nearly the focus on character continuity, you know, that there is between 1 and 2. Like 2 has direct gag callbacks to stunts in Police Story 1.
Yes, this is true.
So I think, you know, with the Criterion release of packaging the first two together, I thought that it's like, well, that's probably just a rights issue, and that's probably part of it. But really, Police Story and Police Story 2 feel like two halves of a whole, and Police Story 3 feels, in terms of franchise filmmaking, it feels like the breakout. You know, this is the one that you don't have to have seen any of the others. You can just watch this and enjoy it and have a good time, and it'll play to the widest possible audience. And I really liked Police Story 3, don't get me wrong, but looking back, just that manic energy, the kind of improvisational feel, even if it's not being improv in the stunts and the big fight scene choreography in the first two, that stuff just sings to me. And it's kind of what I more associate Jackie Chan with now than I think what he kind of became known for after Police Story 3, where it is like he's going to be riding on top of buses. Like that's what I think of Jackie Chan post Police Story 3 kind of career. It's like he's riding on he's standing on top of a bus. and you know, I think, you know, like Rumble in the Bronx, like that was such a big crossover thing for him. And that's what I think of. But as a whole, like this is a really good trilogy of action movies. And I think that 3 kind of, you know, it changes the course in a pretty strong way. But at the end of the day, if you just saw the first Police Story, I think I said it when we did the episode and I stand by it. Police Story is one of the best movies we've watched this year.
Totally agreed. It is a tremendous classic that has finally gotten its due on Blu-ray thanks to Criterion. I don't know if I would call Supercop or Police Story 3 an essential film. There is an important distinction. Supercop, if you get the US cut, not only is dubbed into English, but has a new score. The Weinsteins over at Miramax, and it was released under Dimension. They decided that it needed a new score. And I understand why. I don't think the score for this movie, as it was released in China and Hong Kong, is particularly good. And it also uses some very recognizable samples from other scores.
Yeah, one of them being, I didn't pick up, you said that you think some of it's James Horner's Aliens. I didn't pick that up, but I definitely heard the cue from Danny Elfman's Batman score.
Yeah, it's just a short sample. Like they don't use a full cue from Danny Elfman's Batman, but they did take short samples, and I think one was from James Horner's Aliens and the other was from Danny Elfman's Batman. And there's probably more samples from other scores throughout the movie's score, but I didn't pick up on them.
But yeah, I'm glad we did I'm glad that, you know, when we did Police Story, it's like that was the first Jackie Chan movie you or I had ever seen in full. And I'm glad we did this. Like it was a really fun series to do. I will not be surprised if I end up revisiting the first Police Story within the next year.
Yeah, I think it's definitely on my to buy list to get that first and second combo package. And I also like to see the shorter cut of Police Story 2 because I'll probably like it more.
Yeah, I know there's I think a grainy 35 millimeter copy that comes on that Criterion version of Police Story 2, which is the shorter cut.
Yeah, it definitely needs that. Anyway, that's Police Story. That's all the Police Story movies we're going to cover. I'm so glad we did that. It's really provided a good look into Hong Kong cinema. And also, I know a little bit more about Hong Kong as a country now that I've seen these movies. And I think that's important now that we're seeing Hong Kong in the news so much. I don't know a whole lot about the politics in Hong Kong and all that situation, so I can't talk at length about it, obviously. But, you know, this is one of the ways, you know, that Hong Kong made a distinct identity for itself was in its cinema. And I think watching those first 3 Police Story movies give you a really fun idea of what was capable of coming out of Hong Kong. And then, you know, contrast it to things like John Woo, and you'll see just like how much variety there is. It's really astounding. It's been a fun experience doing all these Hong Kong movies.
Loved it. And you know, I think we'll either continue that in some way as we continue to do action films on here, or we'll find another venue because it's been a really fun experiment. And I'm just as happy that we did it. But let's go to the shelf where we pick some movies that might act as a good pairing or a substitute for our main topic. And as always, we want to encourage you, loyal listeners, to go to GenreVision.com and comment on the post for this episode with your own shelf picks. Travis, what are you going to pull off the shelf for Police Story 3 Supercop?
Just like Police Story 3, I'd like to talk about another movie that was sort of an attempt at making a global blockbuster. This is Enter the Dragon. This is a Hong Kong film. It's a Hollywood film. It's made by Hollywood director Robert Clouse, and it starred John Saxon and Jim Kelly, in addition to Bruce Lee, who headlined the film. And it was a U.S.-Hong Kong co-production, a rather lavish one, as I might add. You know, it's a pretty handsome picture. And I had not really known how successful it was on a box office level because, you know, I had seen its sort of cultural impact, and, you know, lots of movies get released to minimal fanfare and then make their cultural impact later. But Enter the Dragon globally at the time of its release in 1973 made like $90 million, which doesn't sound like a lot today, but if you adjust for inflation, that's literally over $500 million. Enter the Dragon was a huge movie. It's an R-rated, you know, martial arts film with a multicultural cast and crew. and it's a fucking great flick. It's, you know, a combination of Hollywood action film, blaxploitation picture, Hong Kong martial arts film. It's a really great mix of all those things and is absolutely essential viewing. It has an incredible score, probably my favorite score ever by Lalo Schifrin. Please, if you have not seen Enter the Dragon, or if it's been a while since you've seen Enter the Dragon, it's a great time to watch it.
Yeah, I have not seen it since I was probably like before I was a teenager.
Yeah, and Jackie Chan has a brief stunt person role. You blink and you miss him, but he's in it.
Yeah, so I need to revisit it. It's been way too long. Well, for my shelf pick, I decided to go with another third entry in an action movie franchise that kind of deviated from the tone set by the previous two, but I think to glorious result. That is Death Wish 3. I have seen all the Death Wish movies, and of all of them, the only one I will ever rewatch is Death Wish 3.
Why is that?
Well, Death Wish 3 is interesting. Like we talked about with Supercop, the franchise had to change to match kind of modern action standards. The first Death Wish came out in 1974, and that was a very different kind of film at a very different time. That is a bleak, dirty, ugly New York vigilante movie. Death Wish 2 comes out in 82. It's kind of in the same vein, but it's, you know, it hasn't quite gotten to the level of cartoonishness that we'll see in Death Wish 3, because Death Wish 3 comes out in 85. We are now post First Blood. This is the same year that Rambo First Blood Part 2 would come out. And Death Wish 3 is a comic book stupid action movie.
Huh.
It takes the vigilante mold and delivers. I mean, it's by no means, this is still a Death Wish movie, so it is not going to win any points with people with certain social outlooks and stuff. You know, it's not good in that regard. But this is a decrepit Charles Bronson going around and killing 80s movie punks. You know, punks with a capital P. Like this is a thing where like the leader of the gang has basically an inverse mohawk where the middle of his head is shaved and he paints a red stripe down the middle of it. This is pure Saturday morning cartoon stupid, and it's fantastic.
Huh.
It is Charles Bronson's vigilante character, Paul Kersey, coming back to New York and getting in touch with an old friend of his who, of course, gets killed by punks. So he now has to teach this apartment complex of old people how to defend themselves from the punks that have taken over the neighborhood. It's so ridiculous because he's basically just like, yeah, mail order guns, and the guns that just get bigger and bigger get more ridiculous. There's like a turret gun from World War II that is some other guy in the complex just happens to have in his closet. Charles Bronson is apparently able to mail order a bazooka, which he uses at the end of the movie to blow up the main bad guy. It's ridiculous. It is absolutely ridiculous, and there's no way you should ever take what it does seriously, but it's pretty damn entertaining. Also, musical score by Jimmy Page.
Huh, okay.
It's a canon movie. It was the first one, I think, might be the only. I don't know if they did Death Wish 4 and 5, but it's canon produced, and it's just got that level of doofy sleaze about it. I really, really enjoyed Death Wish 3. I've seen the other ones, and they sort of lean into the cartoonish stuff. Like, I think it's in 5 where he kills somebody with a remote-controlled exploding soccer ball.
Oh, yeah, I think I've seen an animated GIF of that, yeah.
Yeah, stuff like that. But they're not nearly... They don't have the same dumbass energy that Death Wish 3 has.
Big dumbass energy.
Yeah, and so, yeah, if you only watch one, people will go to bat for the first one, and I can understand, it's part of that whole 70s New Hollywood, grimy, nasty kind of thing. But, it's another one of those, like, this guy is not supposed to be the hero, but that movie clearly paints him as the hero, but it's trying to be more morally murky. By the time 3 rolls around, it's just like, no, yeah, this guy, it's gotten to that cartoon level of this guy is the hero. Don't worry about it. Don't get wrapped up in the god-awful politics of this all. Just enjoy the stupidity on display. So Death Wish 3, highly recommend it. It's one of my favorite dumb action movies. But let's do some currently consuming.
Nom, 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 nom.
Travis, what's been on your plate?
I watched something that you saw in theaters earlier this year, and that's Brightburn, the bad Superman riff.
Bad Superman. That Superman's
It's bad. Superman is so bad.
If you didn't know he was bad, don't worry. They'll play Billie Eilish's bad guy over the end credits, so you know he is the bad guy, duh.
I think even before that, yeah, you'll figure it out.
You know, if there was any moral question, it's like, I don't know, maybe he's just misunderstood. It's like, no, Billie Eilish told me he's the bad guy. Duh.
I don't know if there's anything else I actually need to say about the movie after that. I did not enjoy this.
Aw.
Yeah.
I mean, I gave it like 3 stars on Letterboxd, so I was like, yeah, it was fine, and there's some stuff worth mentioning, but it was okay.
Yeah, it's my big problem with it is, not the concept. I think there's an interesting concept there, but as far as an execution of its premise, which I think is, ripe with potential, I thought, this executed in like the most bare bones way possible. Like there's really not a proper sense of perspective from any of the 3 main characters, the kid and his 2 parents, the mom of which is played by Elizabeth Banks. And, she's dependable. She's great. Love seeing her in movies, but really her character is not given a whole lot. We don't properly sense things from her perspective or anybody's really. The husband, the dad character, he's doofy as all get out and, does not do anything for the movie's energy or quality when he's on the screen. And it's not really a problem of actors. I don't think the actors are bad at all.
No, it's not just that he's doofy. Like you said, I think one of the biggest problems with the movie is perspective. It never really nails down whose shoes we should be in,
or how they view things and why they view things the way that they do. Like, stories like this, particularly when you're going to examine a story from a new perspective or from a slightly different perspective, you got to understand that stories like this don't take place in a vacuum. You have to set a space, for it to happen. And that's not just a physical space, it's a headspace. We got to understand the headspaces of these characters. And really the only indication we get of headspace from the 2 parent characters is like, they were trying to have a kid for a while and it wasn't working. And then a meteor landed in their backyard and they felt blessed by this child that was carried in this meteor, which of course, as we know, was a spaceship from the planet, not Krypton.
Yes. Here's the thing. What if Superman but evil is by no means a new concept? It's been done a lot in comic books. I would recommend people check out Superman Red Sun. That is a very interesting what if Superman but evil idea. Brightburn, I feel, is kind of the most, like you said, bare bones approach to doing what if Superman but evil. I can't say it's outright saved, but highlights are that it's got some really good gore in it.
Yeah, it's got some fun gore gags in it. All the gore gags are combinations of practical and digital effects, and they're really effective. There's a...
Like, genuinely violent.
Oh, yeah, like really gnarly. And so from a genre film perspective, I enjoyed that aspect of it, but aside from that, I say skip it.
Yeah, I have no desire to ever see it again, and the movie ends with the promise of an expansion of this world, and I'm like, I don't know what else there is to really say with this take on it. Basically the idea of what if superheroes but monsters. And it's like, again, that's not a bad place to ideate from, but they just did kind of the most expected tale you could do with that.
Right. Never in the movie did I feel a sense of awe at this kid's, powers or anything like that.
I think more importantly, I never felt surprised.
I was never surprised. And really the movie didn't do enough to sell, I think, the fear. I mean, there are some sort of really simple scare sequences and setups, but nothing terrifically inventive.
I will say that, and I think I said when I talked about it before, that I do think the movie has something on its mind in terms of entitlement in particularly young males and young white males.
Yeah, I mean, there's a point at which the character, the young boy, says that he is superior. And so it talks about that sort of what happens when you grow up feeling that you are inherently superior to other people. and view other people as lesser beings. You know, there's a little bit of that, but it's just a little soupçon.
Yeah, it's the thematics are not carried through because by the end of the movie, it is just playing out as you would expect.
Yeah, and it's insinuated in the film that the whole reason he landed there in the first place is because the alien society that sent him there didn't send him there on accident. It was so that, you know, he would be raised by Earthlings, and he was essentially there as like a sleeper agent.
Right. Yes. I don't think there's enough tweaks to the basic, this totally isn't Superman, you guys idea that they try, but it's never enough to make it stand on its own two legs.
Agreed. And that's all I have to say about that film. What, sir, have you been currently consuming?
Well, staying on the superhero train, I finally saw Dark Phoenix.
And how was that?
You know, I don't think it deserves the hatred it got. It's not a good movie. If we're going to go on ranking, I think it's better than X-Men Apocalypse.
I haven't seen it. I mean, I believe you. I'm not going to go out of my way to see it, but
it's not where it's, well, that's the thing is that X-Men Apocalypse is a stupider movie and it's an uglier movie.
Learning.
Yes. But that also makes it more memorable and more notable. Dark Phoenix is kind of fine, but that also means it comes off as really bland.
I think the problem is that nobody wanted it.
Well, that's the other thing, too. That's why I say I don't think the hate is deserved, because the hatred comes from a rejection of it purely existing.
Yeah, they rejected it wholesale.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with the finished product. It's the fact that this flies in the face of what we want from superhero event cinema and what we want from particularly this Marvel stable of characters. This is, we're over this. We're done. This is old hat. We don't want you. It didn't matter what the movie was going to do. That was the narrative that built up. And especially with it being delayed and reshot and all this kind of stuff, the meta narrative crushed that movie. That's one of the reasons why I decided I wanted to see it eventually was I'm like, I always feel bad when the narrative around movies ends up being more important than the movie itself. And Dark Phoenix was definitely a victim of that. Now, granted, I'm not coming out here like Dark Phoenix is some underrated gem that you didn't all appreciate. It's like, no, it's pretty much on par for me with most of the kind of factory assembled MCU stuff. And I know that'll probably make some people mad because people love that MCU stuff. And I'm like, this is kind of operating on that same level for me, which is where it's like, it's fine, but it's not remarkable. There's some cool stuff in it, like little kind of gags with mutant power elements, but the villains are bland. The entire motivation of the story is played out in the most cookie cutter expected way possible. It's such a lockstep pattern of how you expect the movie to go, which again, like with Brightburn, I was never surprised by what it was doing. It all fell into place. Like, it's like, oh yeah, this is the movie you should do. And that's uninteresting. But it's by no means the trash fire that it was painted as. And I'm bummed that that's probably going to be its legacy. Is this horrible final note to end that version of the X-Men on? And it's like, honestly, I'd rather Apocalypse had that narrative around it, because Apocalypse is a bad movie.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And, I don't think X-Men was ever going to get any better send-off than Logan. No.
Well, and that's the thing. They've never been able to do a good send-off for this X-Men universe, except Logan. Like, Logan felt very singular, very purposeful. It felt unique in the landscape of superhero cinema. And it's not just because they could say fuck and show blood. Like, its structure felt unique.
Yes. Yeah, and its tone felt unique as well. It was a contemplative movie and it was a sad movie. So, it was something that paid respect to the fact that, like, this thing's going to go away now. Like, we've had, it's had its time, but it's done.
I mean, there's a reason why the final image of Logan, that's what I'll think of when I think of the end of this X-Men franchise.
Right.
Like, that final image is so perfect. And it surprised me. It took me a second to realize, like, oh, that's what that is. I'm like, that's beautiful. And I feel good. But Dark Phoenix, it's just not where superhero cinema is anymore, which is weird because it is. Like, I'm like, this is fine. But being a fine movie is kind of a sin for superhero event cinema. So yeah, again, it's not terrible, but I'm not saying that people need to go out and, because there's bad stuff about it. Like the alien race that are the big bads are the most bland shit ever. Even their designs are just boring and tired. But it's fine. Like by the end, I was like, yeah, that was fine. I don't feel angry or, that this movie deserves to be trashed or that it's like poorly made. It's just really color by numbers. So yeah, Dark Phoenix.
All right. Yeah, it's unfortunate. I do feel bad for the movie in the sense that it did not deserve the reception it got. The reception was basically based on, what is this? I don't want it. Take it away.
Yeah.
Fine. So it's easy to gang up on a movie like that. I'm not trying to say that the movie's good because I haven't seen it. But yeah, it's pretty clear to me that this, was a symptom of a movie just not being wanted in the current pop culture spectrum.
Exactly. Well, let's close things out with things we do want, which are our
comment of the week.
And of course, we want to mention shelf picks from last week's episode on parents. We have loyal listener JT Kennel. His shelf pick was Society, which was a movie I considered for my shelf pick because I love Society, but I think I've done it before or talked about it before on the show. Don't look up anything about Society. Just see it. You'll either love it or you will be repulsed by it. Maybe you'll do both. DT Grizzler, their shelf pick was Frailty, which is a movie I've always liked. It's a really good. I mean, that could have been a scary parents entry. Like that. Frailty's a good movie.
I have yet to rewatch it after my first viewing of it. And my first viewing of it, it was just when it hit DVD and I was young, and the movie didn't do a whole lot for me at that time. But with the kind of critical reception it continues to get and the way that people continue to talk about it, like I got to rewatch it. So maybe we'll find a way to feature it on the show one day. Yeah,
maybe. And loyal listener, Mr. Milksteak, their shelf pick was Raw, which is another one I considered doing, but I felt, it was pretty recent and we talked about it when, whatever last year or the year before that it came out. And we both liked Raw. You really liked it.
Oh yeah. I thought it was really good. And then let's see, our great friend and fellow GenreVision family member, Danny Ryan, also picked Raw, I believe, for her shelf pick.
Sounds about right. And then, both JT Kennel and Mr. Milksteak also said that Parents was a movie that they had seen before and kind of remembered hazily or didn't really click with them the first time. And maybe it's been long enough that they need to give it a rewatch. I mean, we really were surprised by just how much we liked that movie. So I think we would say, yeah, give it another shot.
Yep, for sure. Would you say any one of those gets the comment of the week?
Well, I mean, the it was kind of a group effort here this week.
Yeah, I would say so. We thank everybody who showed up to comment on our Parents episode, which we know is an obscure movie, and we thank you for showing up even when we do the obscure stuff. That's what makes this fun.
We do. But don't worry, no matter what happens with the upcoming potential delay of the show, we will have a much more popular movie for you next episode, which will be It Chapter 2, a movie that I was excited about, and then I was kind of nervous about, and now I'm getting back up to like, I don't know. I think this is going to be weird. I just want it to be weird.
Yeah, I think they're going to have to be weird in order for the material, I think, to be done any sort of justice. But I'm looking forward to it. Have no clue when I'm going to be able to see it because hurricane. You know how these things go. We're going to do it on the show one way or another, just not sure when.
We'll figure it out.
Anyway, if you're itching for GenreVision next week and we're not able to put the episode out on time, what my recommendation is to go try out Patreon. If you go to patreon.com/GenreVision, we have a big library of extra content there. You can pay $5 a month to become a premium subscriber, and that'll give you access to all the content. We do have some sampler stuff up there for you. If you're a little hesitant about wanting to spend the money to become a premium subscriber, go check out the free stuff. We do an extended Currently Consuming every month where we talk about everything that we've consumed during that month. We do little mini episodes, mini reviews. For instance, we did a review, like almost a full-length episode on Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. We've done similar things for Netflix series like Haunting of Hill House. We actually spent an entire episode talking about the Spider-Man game for PS4. It's a big variety of stuff, and we definitely urge you to check that out. Patreon.com/GenreVision. $5 a month lets you become a premium subscriber. And I think that's it.
And as always, we want to thank you all so much for listening. I'm Drew Deitch.
I'm Travis Newton.
And we'll see you sometime soon.
Right here on GenreVision.